Ooh, hey, children of the sun. This lighting is horrible. Where's my lighting at? I have this light on the top of my head, but I need that to read. All right, so we're doing a reading for tarot reader, but actually going to actually do a book reading today. Um, of course, I am reading Interview with the Vampire. I'm doing it live because basically I just want to improve. um, let me see if I can get some more lighting here for you guys that I want to watch me because this looks crazy. Hold on one second. Gonna get some more lighting, guys. More lighting. That's what we do. That's what we do. Let's see if this is better. Oh, that's way better. Way better. I love it. I'm loving it. So we're gonna do some bedtime stories. Grab you some wine, and let's relax. Let's relax and read some bedtime stories. Actually, I don't know if Interview with the Vampire is a very great bedtime story. Is this music too loud? My guitar. If I put it too low, it's gonna go down. All right, be sure to like the video. Now, if you watched the last episode, um, I was giggling because Louis, he's becoming a vampire, and his brother died. He fell down some stairs or something, and he was in regret about his brother dying. He felt responsible for it, and the vampire Lestat had already bitten him. He was getting sick, and he was becoming a vampire, but not quite. So that's where we were at. So I have more light because I'm 46 and I can't quite see very well in the dark. Okay, so let me go a chapter up. Get your wine, y'all. This is bedtime stories. I need to put a timer because I'm not gonna be reading all night. Let's do an hour. Let's do an hour. Okay, Google, set a timer for an hour. Okay. All right. So she's running now. Okay, we're gonna do an hour. No more than that because I get carried away. Be sure to like the video if you like this kind of stuff. Let me get my Louis voice. Well, I lay there helpless in the face of my own cowardice and fattness. Look that word up. Again, he said, perhaps so directly confronted with him, I might in time have gained the courage to truly take my life, not to whine and beg for others to take it. I saw myself turning on the knife then, languishing in a day to day suffering, which I found a necessary penance from the confessional, truly hoping death would find me unaware and render me fit for the eternal pardon. And also, I found myself, as in a vision, standing at the head of the stairs, just where my brother had stood, and then hurtling my body down at the bricks. But then there was no time for courage, or shall I say, there was no time in Lestat's plan for anything but his plan. Now listen to me, Louis, he said, and he lay down beside me now on the steps, his movement so graceful and so personal and at once it made me think of a lover. Recoiled, but he put his right arm, there goes my eyes getting dizzy. He put his right arm around. Never had I been this close to him before, and in the dim light, I could see the magnificent radiance of his eye and the unnatural mask of his skin. And as I tried to move, he pressed his right fingers against my lips and said, "Be still. I'm going to drain you now to the very threshold of death. And I want you to be quiet, so quiet that you can almost hear the flow of blood through your veins. So quiet that you can hear the flow of that same blood through mine. It is your consciousness, your will. You must keep you alive." I wanted to struggle, but he pressed so hard with his fingers that he held my entire prone body in check. And then as soon as I stopped my abortive attempt at rebellion, he sank his teeth into my neck. Sounds kind of sexual. The boy's eyes grew huge. He had drawn farther and farther back into his chair as the vampire spoke, and now his face was tense, his eyes narrow, as if he were preparing to weather a blow. "Have you ever lost a great amount of blood?" asked the vampire. Asked the vampire. "Do you know the feeling?" The boy's lips shaped the word no, but no sound came out. He cleared his throat. "No," he said. Candles burned in the upstairs parlor, but we had planned the death of the overseer. An oil lantern swayed in the breeze on the gallery. All of his light coalesced and began to shimmer, as though as golden presence hovered over me, suspended in the stairwell, softly entangled with the railings, curling and contracting the smoke. "Listen, keep your eyes wide," Lestat whispered to me, his lips moving across my neck. I remember that the movement of his lips raised the hair all over my body, sent a shock of sensation through my body that was not unlike the pleasure of passion. He mused, his right fingers slightly curled beneath his chin, the first finger appearing to lightly stroke it. The result was that within minutes I was weak to paralysis. Panic stricken, I discovered I could not even will myself to speak. The stat still held me, of course, and his arm was like the weight of an iron, but I felt his teeth withdraw with such a keenness that two punctured wounds seemed enormous, lined with pain. And now he bent my helpless head, and taking his right hand off me, bit his own wrist. The blood flowed down upon my shirt and coat, and he washed it with a narrow gleaming eye. It seemed like an eternity that he watched it, and the shimmer of light now hung behind his head like a backdrop of of an apparition or ghost of an apparition. I think that I knew that that what he meant to do even before he did it. And I was waiting in my helplessness as if I had been waiting for years. He pressed his bleeding wrist to my mouth and said firmly, like impatiently, Louis, drink. And I did. Steady, Louis. And hurry, he whispered to me a number of times. And I drank, sucking the blood out of the holes, experiencing for the first time since infancy the special pleasure of sucking nourishment, the body focused with the mind upon the vital source. Then something happened. The vampire sat back, a slight frown on his face. How pathetic is it to describe these things, which cannot truly be described, he said, his voice low, almost to a whisper. The boy sat as in frozen. I saw nothing but that light. Then as I drew blood, and then this next thing was sound, a dull roar at first, and then a pounding, like the pounding of a drum, growing louder and louder, as if some enormous creature were coming up on one slowly through the dark, and an alien force pounding as he came. A huge drum, and then there came the pounding of another drum, as if another giant were coming yards behind him, and each giant intent on his each drum gave no notice to the rhythm of another, and the sound grew louder and louder, and until it seemed to fill not just my hearing, but all my senses, to be throbbing in my lips and my fingers and my flesh and in my temples and my veins, above all in my veins. Drum, and then the other drum, and the then the stat pulled his wrist free suddenly, and I opened my eyes and I checked myself in a moment of reaching for my wrist and grabbing it, forcing it back to my mouth at all costs. And I checked myself because I realized that the drum was heart, and the second drum had been his in the vampire side. Do you understand? The boy began to speak, and then he shook his head. No, no, I mean, I do, he said. I mean, Of course, said the vampire, looking away. Wait, said the boy, in a welter of excitement. The tape is almost gone. I have to turn it over. The vampire watched patiently as he changed it. What happened then? As he, the boy asked. His face was moist. He wiped it hurriedly with his handkerchief. I saw as a vampire. It, his voice was now slightly detached. He seemed almost distracted. Then he drew himself up. Lestat was standing again at the foot of the stairs, and I saw him as I could not possibly have seen him before. He had seemed white to me before, starkly white, so that in the night he was almost luminous. And now I saw him filled with his own life and own blood. He was radiant, not luminous. And then I saw that not only the stat had changed, but all things had changed. It was as if I had only just been able to see colors and shapes for the first time. I was so enthralled by buttons on the stat's black coat that I looked at nothing else for a long time. Then Lestat began to laugh, and I heard his laughter as if I had never heard anything before. His heart, I still heard like the beating of a drum. Now came this metallic laughter. It was confusing. Each sound running into the next sound, like the mingling reverberations of bells until I learned to separate the sounds. And boy, he sounds high. He sounds high as fuck. Until I learned to separate the sounds, and then the overslapped, each soft but distinct, increasing but discreet peals of laughter. The vampire smiled with delight. Peals of bells. Stop looking at my buttons, the stat said. Go out there into the trees. Rid yourself of all this human waste in your body. And don't fall so madly in love with the night that you lose your way. That, of course, was a wise command. When I saw the moon and the flagstones, I became so enamored with it that I must have spent an hour there. I passed I passed by my brother's oratory without so much of a thought of him. And standing amongst the cottonwood and the oaks, I heard the night as if it had a chorus of whispering women, all become beckoning me to beckoning me to their breast. As for my body, it was not yet totally converted, as soon as I became the sight, it begat an ache. All of my human fluids were being forced out of me. I was dying as a human, yet completely alive as a vampire. And with my awakened senses, I had to preside over the death of my body with a certain discomfort and then finally fear. And I ran back up to the steps to the parlor where Lestat was already at work on the plantation papers, going over the expenses and profits for the last year. You are a rich man, he said to me when he came in. Something is happening to me, I shouted. You're dying, that is all. Don't be a fool. You don't have any oil lamps. All this money and you can't afford well oil except for the lantern? Bring me that lantern. Dying, I shouted. Dying? It happens to everyone, he persisted, refusing to help me, as if I look back on this and I despise him for it. But because I was afraid, but because he might have drawn my attention to these changes with reverence, he might have calmed me and told me I might watch my death with some fascination, which I had watched and felt that night. But he didn't. The stat was never the vampire I am. Not at all. The vampire did not say this boastfully. The vampire did not say this. Okay. The vampire did not say this boastfully. He said, it is as if he would truly have not said, he would not have had it otherwise. Where's my phone? Somebody's texting me. Sorry, guys. Alois, he sighed. I was dying fast, which meant that my capacity for fear was diminished as rapidly. I simply regret I was not more attentive to the process. The stat being a perfect idiot. Oh, for the love of hell, he began shouting. Do you realize I made no provision for you? What fool am I? I was tempted to say, yes, you are. No, I was tempted to say, yes, you are, but I didn't. You'll have to bed down with me this morning. I haven't prepared you a coffin. The vampire laughed. The coffin struck me. I think it absorbed all the capacity for terror that I had left. Then came only my mild alarm at having to share a coffin with Lestat. He was in his father's bedroom, meantime, telling the old man goodbye, that he would return in the morning. But where do you go? Why must you live by such a schedule? The old man demanded. And Lestat became impatient. Before this, he had been gracious to the old man, almost to the point of sickening one. But now he became a bully. I take care of you, don't I? I put a better roof over your head than ever put over mine. If I want to sleep all day and drink all day, I'll do it. Damn you. The old man started to whine. Only my peculiar state of emotions and most unusual feeling of exhaustion kept me from disapproving. I was sorry, I got distracted. Only my peculiar state of emotion and a most unusual feeling of exhaustion kept me from disapproving. I was watching the scene through the open door, enthralled with the colors of the counterpane and the positive ride of color in the old man's face. His blue veins pulsed beneath his pink and grayish flesh. I found even the yellow of his teeth appealing to me, and I became almost hypnotized by the quivering of his lip. Such a son, he said, never suspecting, of course, the true nature of his son. All right, Dingo, I know you keep a woman somewhere. You go to see her as soon as her husband leaves in the morning. Give me my rosary. What's happened to my rosary? The set said something blasphemous and gave him the rosary. But the boy started. Yes, said the vampire. I'm afraid I don't allow you to ask enough questions. I was going to ask, rosaries have crosses in them. The rumor about crosses. The vampire laughed. You referred to our being afraid of crosses. Unable to look at them, I thought, said the boy. Nonsense, my friend. Sheer nonsense. I can look on anything I like, and I rather like looking at crucifixes in particular. This vampire says, like, I'm not afraid of crosses. And what about the rumor about keyholes that you can become steam and go through them? I wish I could, laughed the vampire. How positively delightful. I should like to pass through all manner of different keyholes and feel the tickle of their peculiar shapes. No, he shook his head. That is, how would you say today? Mm, bullshit. The boy laughed despite himself. Then his face grew serious. They talking about keyholes. That sounds sexual too. You mustn't be shy with me, the vampire said. What is it? The story about Steak's heart, said the boy. his cheeks coloring slightly. The same, said the vampire. Bullshit, he said, carefully articulating both syllables so that the boy smiled. No magical power whatsoever. Why don't you smoke one of your cigarettes? I see you have them in your shirt pocket. Oh, thank you, the boy said, as if it were some marvelous suggestion. But once he had the cigarette to his lips, his hands were trembling so badly that he mangled the first fragile book match. Allow me, said the vampire. This is very sexual. And taking the book, he quickly put a lighted match to the boy's cigarette. The boy inhaled, his eyes on the vampire's fingers. Now the vampire withdrew across the table with a soft rustling of the garments. There's an ashtray on the basin, he said, and the boy moved nervously to get it. He stared at the few butts and then the few butts in it for a moment, and then, seeing the small wastebasket beneath, he emptied the ashtray and quickly set it on the table. His fingers left damp marks on the cigarette when he put it down. Is this your room? He asked. No, answered the vampire. Just a room. What happened then? The boy asked. The vampire appeared to be watching the smoke gathered beneath the overhead bulb. We went back to New Orleans post haste, he said. Lestat had his coffin in a miserable room near the ramparts. And you did get into the coffin? I had no choice. I begged Lestat to let me stay in the closet, but he laughed, astonished. Don't you know who you are? Yes. But is it magical? Must have this shape? M- must it have the shape? I pleaded, only to hear him laugh again. I couldn't hear the idea, but we argued. I realized I had no real fear. It was a real strange realization. All my life, I feared closed spaces. Born and bred in French houses and lofty ceilings and floor length windows, I had a dread of being enclosed. I felt uncomfortable, even in the confessional church. It was a normal enough fear. And now I realize I protested to Lestat. I did not actually feel this anymore. I was simply remembering it, hanging on to it from habit, from a deficiency of ability to recognize my present and exhilarating freedom. You're carrying on badly, Lestat said finally. And it's almost dawn. I should let you die. You will die. You know. The sun will destroy the blood I've given you, and every tissue, every vein. You shouldn't be feeling this fear at all. I think you're like a man who loses an arm or a leg and keeps insisting that he will feel pain where the arm and leg used to be. Well, that was positively the most intelligent and useful thing Lestat ever said in my presence, and it brought me around at once. Now I get now I'm getting into the coffin, he finally said to me in his disdainful tone, and you get in on top of me if you know what's good for you. And I did. I lay face down on him, utterly confused by my absence of dread and filled with the distaste for being so close to him, handsome and intriguing though he was. And he shut the lid. Then I asked him if he was completely dead. My body was tingling and itching and all over. Mm, no, you're not then, he said. When you are, you'll only hear and see it changing and feel nothing. You should be dead by tonight. Go to sleep. Dead when you woke up? Yes, changed. I should say, as obviously, I am alive. My body was dead. It was sometime before it became absolutely cleansed of all the fluids and matter it had no longer needed, but it was dead. And with the realization of it came another state of my divorce from human emotions. The first thing which became apparent to me, even while Stat and I were loading a coffin into a hearse and stealing another coffin from a mortuary, was Lestat at all. I was far from being his equal, yet infinitely closer to him than I had been before death of my body. I can't really make this clear to you for the obvious reason that you are now as I was before my body died. You cannot understand. But before I died, overwhelming, your cigarette has become one long cylindrical ash. Oh, the boy quickly ground the filter into the glass. You mean that when the gap was closed between you, he lost his spell? He asked, his eyes quickly fixed on the vampire, his hands now producing a cigarette and then a match much more easily than before. Yes, that's correct, said the vampire, with obvious pleasure. The trip back to Pointe de Loc was thrilling, and the constant chatter of Lestat was positively the most boring constant chatter of Lestat was positive and the constant chatter of Lestat was positively the most boring and disheartening thing I had experienced. Of course, as I said, I was far from being his equal, and my I had my dead limbs to contend with, to use his comparison. Whew, my eyes are crossing. To his comparison. And I learned that on the very night when I had to make my first kill, the vampire reached across the table now. Oh, the vampire reached across the table now and gently brushed an ash from the boy's lapel. And the boy stared his withdrawing hand in alarm. Excuse me. Oh, excuse me, said the vampire. I didn't mean to frighten you. Excuse me. They gonna fuck. Excuse me, said the boy. I just got the impression suddenly that your arm was abnormally long. What else is long? You reached so far without moving. No, said the vampire, resisting his hands against. Resting his hand again on his crossed knees, I moved forwards much too fast for you to see. It was an illusion. You moved forward, but you didn't. You were sitting just as now, but your back against a chair. No, repeated the vampire firmly. I moved forward as I told you. Here, I'll do it again. And he did it again, and the boy stared with the same mixture of confusion and fear. You still didn't see it, said the vampire. But you see, if you look at my outstretched arm now, it's really not remarkably long at all. But he raised his arm, first finger pointing heavenward, as if he were an angel about to give the word of the Lord. You have experienced a fundamental difference between the way you see and I see. My gesture appeared slow and somewhat languid to me, and the sound of my finger brushing your coat was quite audible. Well, I didn't mean to frighten you, I confess, but perhaps you can see from this with that my return to Pointe du Lac was at least a new experience. The mere swaying of a tree branch in the wind of the delight. Yes, said the boy, but he was still visibly shaken. The vampire eyed him for a moment, and then he said, I was telling you about your first kill, said the boy. Yes, I should say first, however, that the plantation was in a state of pandemic. Overseer's body had been found. The overseer's body had been found, and so had the blind old man in the master bedroom. And no one could explain the blind old man's presence. And no one had been able to find me in New Orleans. My sister had contacted the police, and several of them were at the Pont de Lac when I arrived, and it was already quite dark. Naturally, and Lestat quickly explained to me that I must not let the police see me in minimum daylight, in minimal light, especially not with my body in the present remarkable state. So I talked to them in the avenue of the oaks before the plantation house, ignoring their request that we go inside. Ignoring, what's my place? Sorry, just a second. Lost my place. And this was like I keep minimal lines. And knowing the request that we go inside, I explained I had been to Point du Lac the night before, and the blind old man was my guest. As for the overseer, he had not been here, but had gone to New Orleans on business. After that was settled, during which my new detachment served me admirably, I had the problem of the plantation itself. My slaves were in a state of complete confusion, and no work had been done all day. We had a large plant then for the making of an indigo dye, and the overseer management had been most important. But I had several extremely intelligent slaves who might have done his job just as well long time before if I had not recognized the intelligence and not feared their African appearance and manner. I studied their I studied them clearly now and gave the management management of things over to them. To the best, I gave the overseer's house on a promise. Two of the young women were brought back into the house from the fields to care for the stad's father. And I told the stad's father, I got lost somewhere. Two of the women were brought back into the house from the fields to care for Lestat's father. I thought this was Louis' plantation. And I wanted as much privacy as possible, and would all they would all of them be rewarded not only for service, but for leaving me and Lestat absolutely alone. I did not realize at the time that these slaves would be the first and possibly the only ones to ever suspect that Lestat and I were not ordinary creatures. Because you can't fool black folks. I failed to realize that their experience with the supernatural was far greater than that of white men. I told you. In my own experience, in my own inexperience, I still thought of them as childlike savages, barely domesticated by slavery. I made a bad mistake. But let me keep to my story. I was going to tell you about my first kill. Lestat bungled it with his characteristic lack of common sense. Bungled it? Said the boy. I should never have started with human beings. But this was something. I had to learn it for myself. Lestat had us plunge headlong into the swamps right after the police had the slave right after the police and the slaves were settled. It was very late, and the slave cabins were completely dark. We soon lost sight of the lights of Pont de Lac altogether, and I became very was the same thing again. Remembered fears, confusion. Lestat had he had any native intelligence might have explained things to me patiently and gently, that I had no need to fear the swamps, that to snakes and insects I was utterly invulnerable, and that must concentrate on my new ability to see in total darkness. Instead, he harnessed with condemnations. He was concerned only with our victims, with finishing my initiation and getting on with it. And when we finally came upon our victims, he rushed me into action. They were a small camp of runaway slaves. Lestat had visited them before and picked off perhaps a fourth of their number by watching from the dark for one of them to leave the fire, or by taking them in their sleep. They knew absolutely nothing of Lestat's presence. We had to watch for well over an hour before one of the men, they were all men, finally left the clearing and came just a few paces into the trees. His pants now and attended to an ordinary physical necessity. And as he turned to go, the stag shook me and said, "Take him." The vampire smiled at the boy, wide eyes. I think I was about as horror struck as you would be, he said, but I didn't know that I might kill animals instead of humans. I said quickly, I could not possibly take him. And the slave heard me speak. He turned his back to the distant fire and peered into the dark. Then quickly he silently, then quickly and silently, he drew a long knife out of his belt. He was naked except for the pants and the belt. A tail, a tall, strong-armed, sleek young man. He said something in a French patois, and then he stepped forward. I realized that though I saw him clearly in the dark, he could not see us. The stat stepped in back of him with a swiftness that baffled me, and I got a hold around his neck while he pinned his left arm. The slave cried out and tried to throw the stat off. He sank his teeth now, and the slave froze as if from a snake bite. He sank to his knees, and the stat fed fast as the other slaves came running. You sickened me, he said when he got back to me. It was as if we were the black insects utterly camouflaged in the night, watching the slaves move oblivious to us, discover the wounded man, drag him back, fan out the foliage, searching for the attacker. Wow. So they done killed this dude in the night and nobody could see them because they're like hidden in the darkness. And like the dude just drops dead to everybody else. He just dropping dead. He's like, he's got puncture wounds and shit, but he's just like, they're moving so fast. Like vampires moving so fast. They're just drinking blood and stuff, but nobody sees them. Wow, that's fucking crazy. Whoa. Oh. I couldn't bring myself to attack and feeling no urge to do so. There were so many things, as I mentioned, which Lestat might have said and done, but he might have made the experience rich in so many ways, but he did not. What could he have done? The boy asked. What do you mean? Killing is no ordinary act, said the vampire. One doesn't simply glut oneself on blood. He shook his head. It is the experience of another's life for certain, and often the experience of the loss of that life through the blood slowly. It is again and again the experience of that loss of my own life, which I experienced when I sucked the blood from the stat's wrist and felt his heart pound within my heart. It is again and again the celebration of that experience. Because for vampires, that is the ultimate experience. He said this most seriously, as if he were arguing with someone who had a different view. I don't think Lestat ever appreciated that, though he could not. I don't know. Let, let me say he appreciated something, but very little. I think of what there is to know in any event, He took no pains to remind me now of what I've felt when I clamped onto his wrist for life itself and wouldn't let go, or to pick and choose a place for me where I would experience my first, where I would experience my first kill with some measure of quiet and dignity. He rushed headlong through the encounter as if it was something to put behind us as quickly as possible, like so many yards of the road. Once he had caught the slave, he gagged him and held him and baring his neck. Do it, he said. You can't turn back now. Overcome with revulsion and weak in frustration, I obeyed. I knelt beside the bent, struggled man, clamping both my hands on his shoulders. I went into his neck. My teeth had only just begun to change, and I had to tear his flesh, not puncture. But once the wound had been made, the blood flowed. And then once that happened, once I was locked to it, drinking, all else had vanished. The stat in the swamp and the noise of the disencampment meant nothing. The stat might have been an insect buzzing lightning, then vanishing in insignificance. The sucking mesmerized me. The warm struggling of the man was soothing to the tension of my hands. And there came the beating of the drum again, which was the drumbeat of his heart. Only this time, it beat in perfect rhythm with the drumbeat of my own heart, and the two resounding in every fiber of my being until the beat began to grow slower, slower, so that each was a soft rumble that threatened to go on without end. And I was drowsing, failing into weightlessness. And then the stat pulled me back. He said, "He's dead. You idiot," he said with the characteristic charm intact. "You don't drink after they are dead. Understand that." Not myself, insisting to him that the man's heart still beat and I was in an agony to clamp onto him again. I ran my hands over his chest and grabbing his wrist. I would have cut into his wrist if Lestat hadn't pulled me to my feet and slapped my face. This slap was astonishing. It was not painful in an ordinary way. It was a sensational shock of another sort, a wrapping of the senses, so that I spun in confusion and found myself helpless and staring. My back against the cypress, the night pulsing with insects in my ears. "You'll die if you do that," Lestat was saying. "He'll suck you right down into death with him, and you'll cling to him in death. And now you've drunk too much. Besides, you'll be ill." His voice grated on me. I had the urge to throw myself on him, but I was feeling just what he said. There was a grinding pain in my stomach, as if some whirlpool was sucking my insides into itself. It was the blood passing too rapidly into my blood, but I didn't know it. The stat moved through the night now like a cat, and as I followed him, my head throbbing, his pain in my stomach no better than we reached the house of Pontelac. As we sat at the table in the parlor, the stat dealing a game of solitaire at the polished wood, I sat there staring at him with contempt. Sorry. I followed him, my head throbbing, this pain in my stomach with no better. As we reached the point of lack, as we sat at the table in parlor, they sat dealing a game of solitaire. On the polished wood, I sat there staring at him with contempt. He was mumbling nonsense. I would get used to killing. I would get used. I would get used to killing, he said. It would be nothing. I must not allow myself to be shaken. I was reacting too much, as if the mortal coil had not been shaken off. I would become accustomed to things all too quickly. Do you think so? I asked him finally. I really had no interest in his answer. I understood now that the difference between I understood the difference between us in his answer. I understood now, for me, the experience of killing had been cataclysmic. And Louis is so had that had that of sucking Lestat's wrist. These experiences so overwhelmed and so changed my life of everything around me, from the picture of my brother on the parlor of the wall to the sight of the single star of the topmost pane of the French window, that I could not imagine another vampire taking them for granted. I was altered permanently, and I knew it. In what I felt, and profoundly for everything, even the sound of the playing cards being laid down one upon another when the shining rose of the solitaire was respect. The stat felt the opposite, or he felt nothing. He was a sow's ear out of which nothing, as boring as a mortal, as a trivial and unhappy as a mortal. He chattered over the game, belittling my experience and utterly locked against the possibility of any experience of his own. By morning, I realized that I was his complete superior, and I had been sadly cheated in bringing him for a teacher. He must guide me through this necessary lesson. In there any more if there were any more real lessons I must tolerate in him in a frame of mind which were blasphemous in life itself. I felt cold towards him. I had no contempt and superiority, only a hunger for new experience, for that which was beautiful and devastating, and in my kill, I saw that I was to maximize every experience available. I was to maximize every experience available to me, and to extend, and I must extend my own powers, my own learning, lest that was of no use to me. He's having regrets. Lestat is a bad maker. We've seen the movies, we've seen the TV shows. Lestat was a bad maker. Come on, microphone. It was, is it okay? Right there. It was well past midnight when I finally rose out of the chair and went out into the gallery. The moon was large over the cypress, and the candlelight poured from the open doors. The thick plastered pillars and walls of the house had been freshly whitewashed. The floorboards, freshly swept in the summer rain, had left the night clean and sparkling in drops of water. I leaned against the end pillar of the gallery, and my head touched the soft tendrils of the jasmine. Jasmine. Lost my place. The jasmine, which grew there in a constant battle with the wisteria. And I thought of what lay before me throughout the world and throughout time, and I resolved to go out with the delicate and reverent learning that from each thing which would take me to best to another. What this meant, I wasn't sure myself. Do you understand me when I say I did not wish to rush headlong into experience? That what I felt as a vampire was too powerful to be wasted. Yes, said the boy eagerly. It sounded as if it was like being in love. Vampire's eyes gleamed. That's correct. It's it is like love. He smiled. And I tell you, my frame of mind that night, so you can know there are profound differences between vampires and how I can take a different approach from the stat. You must understand that I did not snub him because he did not appreciate his experience. I understand how such feelings could be wasted. But then Lestat did something which was to show me a amount of time. You must understand that I did not snub him because he did not appreciate his experience. I simply could not understand how much how such feelings could be wasted. But then Lestat did something because but then Lestat did something which was to show me a way to go about my learning. He had more than a casual appreciation of the wealth of Pontelac. He had he'd been much pleased by the beauty of the china used for his father's supper. He liked the feel of the velvet drapes. He traced the patterns of the carpets and his toe with his toe. And now he took from one of the china closets a crystal glass and said, "My dear Miss Glasses." Only he said this with an impish delight that caused me to study him with a hard eye. I disliked him intensely. "I want to show you a little trick," he said. That is, if you like glasses. And after setting it on the card table, he came out on the gallery where I stood and changed the manner again and into the stalking animal, eyes piercing the dark beyond the lights of the house, peering down under the arching branches of the oaks. In an instant, he vaulted the railing and dropped softly on the dirt below, and then lunged into the blackness to change something in both his hands. When he stood before me with it, I gasped. To see it, it was a rat. Don't be such a damned idiot, he said. Haven't you ever seen a rat? It was huge, struggling field rat with a long tail. He held its neck so I couldn't bite. Rats can be quite, he said, and took the rat to the wine glass and slashed his throat. Filled the glass rapidly with blood. The rat then wiggling over to the gallery railing, and Lestat held the wine glass to the candle triumphantly. You may well live off rats from time to time. So swipe that expression off your face, he said. Rats, chickens, cattle, traveling by ship, you damn well better live off rats. If you don't wish to cause such a panic on board that they search your coffin, you damn well better keep the ship clean of rats. And then he sipped the blood as delicately as if it was brandy. He made a sly face. It gets cold so fast. Do you mean then we can live from animals? I asked. Yes. He drank it down and then casually threw the glass at my face. I still fragments. You don't mind, do you? He gestured to the broken glass with a sarcastic smile. I sure hope you don't, because there's nothing much more you can do about it if you do mind. You and your father are the point to like if I might, I said. Wait, no. You and your father out of Pontiac your first show of temper. Why would you do that? He asked with a mock alarm. You don't know everything yet, do you? He was laughing then and walking slowly about the room. He ran his fingers over the satin finish of the splinter. Do you play?